That's right. So I'm actually deep inside the bowels of the old San Francisco Mint building, which is the actual historic building where they stored 1/3 of the country's gold back around the turn of the century. It survived the 1906 earthquake of San Francisco, and many, many decades later, it is now home to my haunted attraction, Terror Vault.
Nice.
Fantastic, fantastic. And this was your press night?
No, actually, so we did press today. We did this piece that's going to be for NBC Live. So if you live in California, although it's not live, obviously, because it's airing later, but that's what the show is called. But it's going to air in San Diego and Los Angeles and San Francisco, of course. And I took the I guess newscaster, you'd call him, the host, on a little tour. And then I taught him how to make vegan fake blood, because in San Francisco, with the actors in San Francisco, of course, I had to figure out how to make vegan fake blood.
Really? So what is that like a citywide mandate?
Well, it's something where, you know, people come to my show and we have this option where you can opt in for interactivity. So if the guests wear a red glow necklace, it indicates to the actors that they are okay with being touched or pulled into a private scene, maybe locked in a coffin. You know, they have a little more of an extreme experience. We have a lot of nuns in this show, and they have electric prodders.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
As they should.
Yes, but the hilarious thing is, with all of that sort of mess, the one thing people get concerned about is when we try to feed them something, they'll stop and say, no, is it vegan? You know, so
is it organic?
Exactly. Is that human heart? Is it organic and vegan? Because I need to know.
Is that a macrobiotic liver?
So what constitutes vegan fake blood? Because vegan blood fake blood is usually corn syrup, right?
I was going to say fake blood would not have any animal products in it anyway,
right.
Would it?
Exactly. And so I have turned this into like a bit of a marketing gimmick.
Like spewing.
Because when they started asking if it was vegan, I found it to be so hilarious and so bizarre that that's where, you know, they drew the line, that I started marketing that our haunt specializes in making vegan fake blood, which is really no different than fake blood.
Excellent.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant.
Excellent.
P.T. Barnum would be proud of you. Now, the image on the screen, who I believe is christened Peach's Pinhead for obvious reasons. I was some little time ago sitting on Sheldon. Let me rephrase that. Sitting in my lazy boy, who is called Sheldon. I didn't call him Sheldon.
That's the model name. All the lazy boy models had names like Colin and Jeffrey, and
I chose Sheldon.
And there's a Sheldon.
I love
that. It was my birthday present to myself a few years ago. I think the lazy boy is without question America's finest contribution to Western civilization.
I got you an apple pie. An apple pie that year too. It was very American themed. You get a lazy boy, an apple pie.
Yes, and an organizer to go on the side.
Yes, to put his remote controls in.
So there I was, in the warm embrace of Sheldon, minding my own business, and Steph leant across to show me her phone and said, "I think you should see this."
Oh, and it was Peaches?
And it was,
yeah, right.
It was. So, explain yourself, madam.
Well, I mean, so as Peaches Christ, I have always built this character to celebrate my favorite cult movies, cult icons, cult characters, and of course, you and your character, a Pinhead, in the Hellraiser movies, especially, you know, Hellraiser and Hellbound, were such huge inspirations to me. I mean, I had pictures of you in my locker, you know, and it was a problem, you know, it was a problem at my Catholic school. They didn't like it, you know.
Nuns with brothers.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, endless amounts of inspiration. And that event where the picture was taken is actually a legendarily large, I mean, something I never imagined would happen, which is a drag convention. It's called RuPaul's Drag Con. And it's a huge drag convention. And the fact that it even exists is amazing to me, because when I started doing drag was not popular. You know, it was still very underground and relegated to niche audiences. And that was fine with me. I actually think, you know, I really like kind of being punk rock or transgressive. And so I had that costume actually created for another event. And the event, I guess I like to upset people, because I was invited to host a night of horror music at the San Francisco Symphony, the Davies Symphony Hall, which is about as raw as you get in San Francisco. And I said to my costume designer, Amy, I really want to do something, you know, that's shocking, that's real horror. You know, I don't want to dress up as some spooky drag queen. I want to do something shocking. Do you think we could do a Pinhead inspired Peaches look? She came back with a sketch, and I was a little bit concerned. But we talked about the idea of sadomasochism and autonomy, and, you know, ownership over choices. And, you know, I guess I don't ever want to be that drag performer who's presenting misogyny. You know, I don't. And so it was a really complicated conversation with a number of people to create this costume. And so, you know, Amy, God bless her, built the whole thing. She worked with a makeup effects guy named Jason Henricks, who did the breast tissue. And then together they put the thing together. And it is one of my favorite costumes. And so I wore it to DragCon in that photo that you saw. And I was hosting a horror.
So you walk on stage to join the San Francisco Symphony Orchestra in that costume?
Yes, actually.
Take us to that moment, if you will.
I have to add this very quickly. On when I posted some of the promo shots on your Facebook page, somebody commented, I will always love that Peaches did breast tissue correctly. So
anatomically correct breast tissue.
It's so good.
I mean, I'm glad that they noticed, because I cannot take credit. The one thing I will say is that Peaches Christ really truly embodies the "it takes a village" mantra, because I do not make my own costumes. I do my own makeup, but I did not do the prosthetic bald cap or the nails in the head. You know, I just did the eye makeup. But yeah, so wearing that to the symphony, you know, I had warned them that I was going to wear something adult and horror. And I said it was a Cenobite. I was going to be a Cenobite. I don't know if they knew.
They didn't register it. Yeah. Oh, a Cinnabon. He's going to be a Cinnabon. That sounds cute.
And you know what was really cool was the way I entered was they did the whole beginning of the title sequence to Psycho. So they played the whole title sequence, which is so great when you hear the live symphony orchestra doing all of those strings. And then they had a big stretched opaque piece of plastic that Pinhead, you know, was backlit. So I walked up, you know, with a big spotlight behind me, so they could see the nails and the skirt and everything coming up to the you know, the opaque piece of plastic. And I had a real butcher knife that they let me use. And of course, you know, everything is union, everything had to be looked at, you know, everything had to be tested, you know, which is not how I do anything. You know, they do it the right way. I just do it. And then they went into the strings for, you know, the shower scene, and I stabbed through the plastic, and that was how I made my entrance, you know. And then there she was, Peaches Pinhead, and
like a scene for producers, for everybody.
Right.
Yeah.
I was thinking, looking at it, it's interesting because obviously it references to the skinned man in the first Hellraiser film. Mm-hmm. I've always said one of the really clever things that Clive does there, and is directly inspired by Vesalius's anatomical drawings, which is Renaissance, I guess, 16th century, 15th, 16th century. That Clive doesn't put the Skinned Man on screen as a boo. It's, you know, it's there and it's gone, and everyone goes, that was scary, but it's okay, it's gone away. He puts the Skinned Man on screen, and then he makes him stay on screen. And he walks and talks, and he's in love, and he's in lust, and he smokes, and he drinks wine, and he's a very civilized skinned man. And that's fine, but it's in Hellbound, we get skinned Julia. And I always think there's something, and I don't know why, I can't quite explain it to myself, more unsettling and upsetting about a skinned woman than a skinned man. And I think to me it is specifically about skinned breasts. And yeah. I don't know whether that's because breasts are themselves a fetishized and slightly taboo image in the first place, and seeing them skinned is more disturbing. I have to defer to the women in the room. You know,
I don't have much to speak of, but you know, they are there, and you know,
very lovely they are too.
I'm glad you're happy with them. That's all that matters. But I mean, they're delicate. You know, they're delicate. The skin is delicate, and it's, you know, seeing that is shocking when you see that image. I mean, even for somebody who, you know, is not very much fazed by gore or anything like that. And it is that because, you know, as a female, you go, ow, fuck, you know?
Right.
But yet it's strangely beautiful too.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah, I have to say, I was also a little bit nervous, but when we talked about it, and she described it as, she said, look, drag is about taking what already exists and exaggerating it, you know, making it bigger, making it more. How do you look at a Cenobite? And we looked at all these pictures, right? And especially the classic 4 Cenobites. And we were looking at places where it appears their flesh is pulled back, or, you know, the female Cenobite's throat has been kind of pulled open, and, you know, there's these sort of, you know, the skinning on the Cenobites themselves. And I thought, when she said that, I thought, you're right. In order to make it drag, it's already so over the top, you know, where do we go? And so that's where we went. And, you know, I will say that, you know, I still love the costume, but it even caused me to pause and take stock.
I think it's great.
Yeah,
out of all, and God knows we have seen a lot of people dressed up, all different variations of Cenobites and Pinhead. It's definitely my favorite. And the fact that you're smiling, and it's just so, it's
now,
such a wonderful picture.
So you've painted the picture. Wonderful image of you breaking through the plastic at the symphony. God, I would have paid good money to have been in the front few rows of the stalls for that. But you're clearly not at the symphony in the picture that we saw. So explain to us what happened here.
So we were arriving at DragCon, which is this huge drag convention, which again is just so surreal in its own right, because I never dreamed that there'd be thousands and thousands and thousands of people attending a convention at the Los Angeles Convention Center that centers around drag. Much of it, of course, is because of RuPaul and the success of her show. But also just drag. With the success of the show, drag itself has become very popular. And so I was asked to host a panel on horror at the convention with Elvira and Sharon Needles. And so the three of us would—
Another Pittsburgher, right?
Another Pittsburgh, yeah, one of my good Pittsburgh friends. And so the three of us were going to be doing a horror panel and talking about the sort of intersection between horror and drag. And I wanted to, again, I'm like, okay, well, I know what costume I need to wear. I didn't want to just show up as a spooky queen. I wanted to show up as something that's like real horror. And I couldn't believe it when we got out of the car, because I actually was so oblivious to the fact that there were religious protesters out front, because it's so normal. Sadly, when you do any big gay event, gay pride or any big gay event,
always there.
Yeah,
so
they
like kind of a equivalent of the Westboro Baptist Church people. They just
and sometimes they are those people, right? So and if they're not those people, then they're knockoffs.
Westboro,
West Value, Westboro. Yes.
I mean, and they're kind of begging to be trolled in a way,
absolutely.
Because it's so ridiculous. But there I am dressed as Pinhead, I'm gonna just walk right by them. And my partner who was helping me, Nihat, was like, don't you want to get a picture with them? This is the moment, like, I don't care how late you might be, you need to get a picture. So I ran over, and smiled and posed for those photos. And it's probably the most viral an image of me has ever gone. Was
it's
that
perfect?
Picture.
It looks fake. I mean, it's so perfect. The way the hell and the red lettering, and it's just
everything.
I love it so much.
Perfect size, and you're pointing up to it. And actually, the thing that makes it for me, which I never quite understand, is that down in the bottom right-hand corner of the picture, there appears to be a barbecue. Laid out.
There is. I didn't notice that. Is it like hot dogs or something?
Yes, there's lots of hot dogs, which would make Josh excited. He loves hot dogs.
If you're from California, you know exactly what that is, because there is this thing in California where at any major event or just nightlife on the weekend, it's a Latin thing where street vendors will put out these sort of grills and do bacon wrapped hot dogs.
Yeah.
I'm hungry.
With the peppers and the onions, and it smells so good. I mean, it smells crazy good. But I have to say, I love street tacos. I'll stop at a taco truck any day, but I haven't quite yet attempted the hot dog. I think, maybe if I still drank, I would do it. But, ever since I gave up drinking, the bacon wrapped hot dog is where I draw the line.
Oh, I'll eat a street hot dog in a second. I don't care.
Absolutely.
Sounds good to me.
We
But
used to
that it looks like you're preparing to do the barbecue.
I didn't even notice that, because I can't take my eyes off of Peaches and what's going on behind her. It's so great.
Peaches and her peaches.
Peaches and her peaches. Yeah. It's good. It's always going to be my favorite, probably.
Oh, thank you.
That's fantastic.
Yes.
An extraordinary image.
Yeah, but they used to set up the hot dog wagon, which I thought was pretty good marketing, when I'd go with my my friend Scott to the one gay bar here in Pittsburgh. He'd come out, and all these people, lots of guys pouring out of the club at night, and there would be a hot dog wagon outside.
Oh, really?
2 o'clock in the morning, everybody gathering around the hot dog wagon outside the gay club.
Do you remember a place called Pegasus?
That's what I'm talking about.
Oh, yes. I used to go there when I was in college.
Yes, Pegasus, yep. Cool. That was a fun place.
Right
by Condemnation.
Yes.
Condemnation.
Yes.
It was a marital aids store.
Next to the
gay bar. On the top floor, I think, because Pegasus was underneath. It was you had to go downstairs to get into Pegasus.
The basement.
Yeah.
So you've got a gay bar and marital aids and a hot
dog stand. What else?
Do you need anything else, really? Do you?
That's everything you need in life.
Crazy.
Yeah.
I would like to take you back to your birth.
Okay.
You weren't expecting transgression. What am I trying to say? Regression therapy.
Regressive therapy.
Yes. Because of all the unlikely places for Peaches Christ to be born, she springs to life, I gather, fully formed at Penn State University.
Yes.
Your alter ego, can I state it that way?
Yes.
Is creating a film as part of his thesis, and which is has the intriguing title of Jizz Mopper, a love story.
Great.
I love that Jizz Mopper is qualified as being, it's okay, it's a love story. And Peaches is created for that film, yes?
Yes. So you're correct. My alter ego was a film student, and up until that movie, I was probably more what you would call like an everyday club kid as far as drag goes. You know, I was doing more sort of gender fuck kind of stuff. You know, I'd wear a purple beret and my pink hair to class or whatever, which, you know, at Penn State in the mid and early 90s was actually quite scandalous. You know, so I was a fan of drag. I loved drag. And my interest in drag, you know, was really inspired through movies. So I always associated drag with movies because my introduction to drag was through Divine and Frankenfurter. And so to me, great cult movies had drag queens in them. You know, that just made sense. So I actually co-wrote Jizz Mopper, a love story, to feature a drag character. But it was never my intention to also play the character. It just was the reality that when we went to shoot and we were looking for drag queens in central Pennsylvania, there weren't very many to be found.
No.
Yeah. And then, well, the other problem was that we were needing to shoot in one of these adult emporiums, and none of the ones in State College or around State College, or even as close as Altoona, were comfortable with a group of students going in and shooting there. And so the location we found was in Harrisburg, which was a 2-hour drive. And so it was a lot to ask of an actor, like, oh, you know, it's your last year in college and we're going to need you every weekend for 4 months, you know, because we would only shoot on the weekends and we could only shoot all night long. So kind of out of necessity, I stepped in and became this character who originally was written to be Coco. But she, when the Puerto Rican actor quit, who was playing Coco, and I stepped in to take over the role, she went from being Coco to Peaches. But I was told by the Christian cinematographer, Eric, that he said, it is one thing to ask me to shoot in this fucking, you know, porno shop. It is quite another to call yourself Peaches Christ. I'm begging you. My parents have already given us money to help make this movie. Would you please not do that? So if you see the movie, she's just Peaches, you know.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
But you were determined the name was remaining.
Well, you know, it was kind of my first experience. So I had always been a kid who loved performing and creating and making movies and doing plays and theater, and I did an improv troupe in high school, and so I actually learned sort of the rules of improv theater when I was pretty young for that, you know, and then continued to do some improv stuff in college. And it didn't occur to me that that would help me with a drag character at all. Like I'd never planned it. But of course, when I did Peaches for the movie, it was a scripted experience and it's very controlled. But when we went to promote the movie and I got to be Peaches, you know, on the streets or in the clubs or at parties, I realized that I could be this other persona because my alter ego, Joshua, is actually quite introverted and a little bit shy and more comfortable kind of observing things and standing back and watching things or directing people behind the scenes, and less comfortable on stage. But as Peaches, I found that I could sort of really perform, and I really liked the drag, and and everything that I had been told. I think the religious part of it for me, and the anger, because Peaches back then was a lot more offensive, pretty consistently. I think that the drag and the sort of the femme actualization was, in a way, me giving the middle finger to the Catholic Church and to a community of people who told me, you hang out with too many girls, you should play with boys, you should like sports, you should stop walking on your toes, you shouldn't like this thing that you like, because I was a sissy. And so I think in many ways Peaches was always inside of me, but the world told me that she was wrong, that it was dirty, or that who I really was a problem. And so I feel like when people talk about drag, I think they miss sometimes that there's this sort of carnal part of it, that there's this part of the performance that you're missing. And it is this expression that's been so repressed for a lot of us, that it comes through in this sort of way that it's hard to qualify, and I think it's why you can sometimes tell the difference between what I would call like a real drag queen and a sort of a pretend drag queen.
That's what I was going to ask. Do you think that aspect of it has been lost over the past, I don't know, 5-10 years or so, because it has sort of become very accepted?
Yeah. I will say this. I will say that I think because drag is so hard, and of course women know how hard it is, because they've also been encouraged to wear things that are uncomfortable and do things to their body that are unnatural. And luckily we live in a world now where hopefully women don't need to feel that kind of pressure. But of course, as drag performers, we're actually kind of making a mockery in the best way possible of exaggerating sort of femininity and sort of almost the phoniness of it,
Right.
the same hair and so for me, the corsets, the makeup, the fabric. I mean, even this fabric, you may not know it, but this is more painful than having nails banged into my head. these little sequin, they cut you. They cut you at the neck. Like, drag hurts. It hurts. So I think the performers tend to stick around who are the real deal, because it's just too much to go through to be a casual,
Yeah.
It's the fan culture that has changed.
Right.
Okay.
That's what's changed.
Now, from my limited experience of observing these things, I've always been struck that there's kind of two things that happen. One is the very closely observed imitation of usually a film star, Judy Garland or whoever it may be, and the other is the very exaggerated and often slightly deliberately unattractive expression of femininity, but also always massively exaggerated. Now, without question, there have been times when some shimmering beauty has walked on stage as part of one of these drag performances that I've been at, and I have, in those moments, been hopelessly in love. Is there a distinction in the drag community between those who want to impersonate a perfection of beauty, which is in itself not real and unattainable, and the other direction? Is there a split between the two?
So to answer that, it's a really big answer. So I'm gonna sort of boil it down to the fact that you are completely right, that both those and more styles of drag exist under the umbrella of sort of a drag art form. And so I think the first style you were talking about is like female illusion. Someone worships, I think of Jimmy James, who in the 90s, Jimmy James could impersonate Marilyn Monroe so flawlessly that people often mistook pictures of Jimmy for actual Marilyn, and they were published. And there was I forget where it was. It was a country who put Marilyn Monroe on their postage stamp and accidentally used an image of Jimmy.
Wow.
And then it came to light that the stamp, which looked exactly, was Marilyn Monroe. People were like, actually, that's entertainer Jimmy James. But Jimmy is a dear friend of mine. And what I love about drag is we appreciate each other so much. So as much as I think there's this sense, or there's this desire to think of us as all like tearing each other's wigs off and stuff backstage. But the reality of it is most of us really get each other. Again, it goes back to me having more of a problem with modern drag fan culture than drag entertainers, because this tradition of drag being kind of anything you want it to be, whether it's a flawless illusion of someone, or a campy, ridiculous, or even disgusting version of a character, that we're all drag performers. And that also includes drag kings, who are typically women who dress up as men. And one of the best is as a performer called Elvis Herselvis here in San Francisco, who does a flawless Elvis impersonation.
It's the names for me. It's always the names are so good.
Karen from accounting is one.
No, Karen from finance.
Karen from finance
is one of my favorite names.
Yes.
Well, she's wonderful. She's an Australian queen.
Right.
And that all of it kind of fits under the umbrella. And then the other thing that gets complicated as well is that drag was and always has been a place that's inclusive of people who are non-binary, who are trans women, who are outside of the costume, often experiencing or presenting in ways that might be confusing as well. So it's gender in a blender, usually.
Gender in a blender.
That's good.
Mention of Marilyn as well. I have to give a shout out to what I consider to be the greatest closing line in the history of cinema, in what I think is the greatest comedy ever made, which is Some Like It Hot, when Jack Lemmon in drag is in the launch being taken out to the yacht for his life of married bliss. I forget the name of the millionaire, and Lemmon is enumerating all the reasons why they can't get married, and finally, in desperation, hauls off his wig to declare with his diamante earrings, "I'm a man. Nobody's perfect." That's the best closing line in the entire history of cinema, as far as I'm concerned.
I have to say that I think you're right. And I had the pleasure of creating a course that I taught at San Francisco Art Institute called Girls on Film. And it was a history of drag performance in cinema. And I highlighted Some Like It Hot, specifically that moment, because there is this sort of canon of films that feature drag, but from all the way back to Fatty Arbuckle in the silent film era, there was this sort of idea that the character presenting in drag still needed to be obviously heterosexual. So they would create these sort of scenarios like Some Like It Hot, where it's like, you are literally doing drag to save your life because you're running from the mob, right? And then it made it okay for audiences to enjoy drag. Audiences have always wanted to enjoy drag. And, so they come up with, even, Tootsie, Mrs. Doubtfire, there were always these sort of scenarios that no one ever did drag for any of these reasons, right? So they would kind of take the queerness out of the drag experience so that a mainstream audience could enjoy it. Right. But that moment in Some Like It Hot is so special because it basically winks at the queers specifically and sort of thumbs its nose up at uptight straight people and says, yeah, we know this is a little bit queer,
It makes me, it reminds me of probably one of my all-time, it's tied in first place, Victor Victoria.
Yes.
The scene where Julie Andrews is dressed up like Victor and James Garner is still very confused because he's attracted to Victor, but trying not to be, and they escape from the drag show where Toddy started the fight, and they're in the back alleyway, and James Garner goes to kiss Victor, and he says, "I don't care if you are a man," and she says, "I'm not a man," and he says, "I still don't care." and that, I think that was so like, just like, like you're saying, it
crosses the same
lines.
it
crosses that line.
It goes back to Shakespeare, undoubtedly to before Shakespeare, but of course in Shakespeare's day, all the female characters were played by actors. There were no actresses on stage. So you think of all the great female characters in Shakespeare, in a range from Lady Macbeth through to Juliet, they're always played by actors. And for roles like Juliet, almost certainly by young boys, probably early teenage boys. And I don't think there would be any way of researching it, but I would be sure that the queer element would play into that as well. Shakespeare was obviously very conscious of what he was doing because he uses it over and over again as a device. And I think there would be no question that a lot of the time, the actors playing the female roles would be playing it up and, tipping the wink and giving a little nudge to the audience, especially in the comedies where Shakespeare more than once uses the ruse of having a female character desperately in love with one of the male characters who pretends to be a man in order to travel with him and be close to him. So you now have a boy playing a woman pretending to be a man because she is in love with the man. And Shakespeare, he plays with that all the time, tripping the genders on top of each other. And it seems clear to me that the Elizabethan audience would have been very quick to see what Shakespeare was doing. So it's an old tradition. When I was talking with Josh yesterday, we talked about the pantomime tradition in England, which doesn't translate over here, but it's a Christmas show in which there's always the hero and heroine, and the hero is known as the principal boy and is always played by a girl, an actress in her 20s usually. So those scenes where he falls in love with her and where they share their kiss on stage, that's always, in fact, as it were, a lesbian kiss being presented. This is a family institution in the UK. I grew up. It's where I first wanted to be an actor, was watching panto. And then also the big feature of the pantomime is the dame, who is an actor playing usually a blousy, middle-aged woman. And you get all kinds of variations on a theme going on there. There are a lot of actors who specialize in doing that, and they do that every Christmas. And a lot of those actors are gay, but there are also a lot of actors who specialize in that who are not.
Apparently.
No, well, there was I'm thinking very specifically, it's not a name I think that will mean anything in America. He was a brilliant North of England comedian. Lots of comedians played Dame. His name was Les Dawson, and he specialized in long comedy monologues, very serious, but very, very funny. And he would play Dame, didn't change his voice. He'd have short sleeve dresses on with no attempt to hide hairy arms, and low-cut dresses with no attempt to hide a hairy chest. He'd have the stuffed bra, and he'd do a lot of that, you know, a lot of lifting up the boobs acting going on. But otherwise, he was never doing anything other than being a middle-aged man in a dress.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody around him accepted the character as a woman. So that's it's a long trip, and as I say, that's a family outing at Christmas, is going to the pantomime with all this transgressive subtext going on. And sometimes, as I say, the dame is effectively presented as a drag act. It's a very precisely presented. I've played dame myself in pantomime.
What was your name?
Dame Sadie Spangle in Goldilocks and the Three Bears. I had the time of my life. I absolutely
And without naming names, didn't a fellow actor tell you something interesting?
I think we ought to name names.
Actually. Go right. I have no problem with that.
Well, he told me, so I don't think. He's a very well-known actor now.
Well, you probably shouldn't name names.
Well, he won't care. He's English. He won't care. Colin Firth, who was then dating the actress who was playing Mummy Bear. So he came to see the show, and he slightly sheepishly told me the following day that he had a night punctuated by highly erotic dreams featuring me as Sadie Spangle.
Wow.
I was very flattered, both on behalf of myself
and Sadie.
On behalf of Sadie. I had two wonderful costumes because I was like it was set in a circus, so I was like the ring mistress. So in my first half costume was a silver cowgirl costume.
Do pictures exist?
There must be. I was thinking today because I wanted to find them, and you won't find it. You won't find it.
If anyone has it, it would be Phil and Sarah, wouldn't it?
Maybe. No, I don't know that even they would. I must have them somewhere. My second half costume was a Christmas tree, basically.
You were a Christmas tree?
I was a Christmas tree. It was a green dress, you know, hooped from the boobs down, so it went outwards like a Christmas tree, hung with tinsel and parcels. But you found a very high level of acceptance when you've been to perform in the UK, and I think that's because drag is, you know, every child is familiar with the tradition from going to panto.
Mm-hmm.
Does that still happen now?
Panto? Yes, to a much lesser extent.
As a Christmas tradition?
Yes. Oh, right. It's absolutely a Christmas tradition.
I'm kind of aware of it now because I have been doing drag theater, I guess you would call it, since I started doing drag, and I built my shows screening movies. So I would do these parody shows before movies. But I guess the point of saying that is that drag in the United States and North America and a lot of places is really mostly and has been mostly limited to a nightlife experience, a nightclub experience, and drag on stage in theaters, and especially in cinemas, what wasn't normal. And so because I was doing more like what you would consider to be theater, you know, the audience is seated, you know, there's a stage. In the US, it has been a challenge, especially when leaving San Francisco, to take our show on the road.
Sorry to interrupt, just quickly, was drag historically part of vaudeville, as I know it was part of music hall in the UK? Indeed, there's suggestions that the word starts from performers in the music hall in the late 19th century in England, who were wearing, you know, the Victorian bustles and the long hanging dresses with the kind of capes behind them that dragged on the floor. And those performers talked about putting on their drags
Yes.
when they would get dressed up, and that's where the name has arisen. So it's built into the music hall tradition in the UK. Was it part of vaudeville here?
I believe it was, but I'll say this. I feel like there was some point, and I don't know when this was culturally. My sense is that it was in the 50s, where the US became much more conservative as far as pop culture, entertainment goes. Things like drag, and I want to say I think you're correct as far as the derivation of the word or where the etymology, because a lot of people associate it with a rumor that it was the code or the acronyms Shakespeare used for dressed as girl, but that has been refuted by historians. And most historians actually say, no, it comes from garments being dragged across the floor. So you're correct, I believe. Watch, someone's going to tell us we're both wrong.
No doubt.
But I think, just especially now as someone who, thank God I'm successful enough that I get to go to the UK, almost every year now and bring a show or a tour. And what I was going to say was really that, like, the UK was the first to really understand what I do, because they've grown up with drag as a theatrical art form. Whereas in the US, people had only ever seen drag in nightclubs. They'd only ever seen drag as a nightlife experience. So it was harder for me to market it or sell it to a new city in the US, whereas in the UK, not at all. They got it immediately. They knew the spirit of the event because of Panto, which also includes a tradition of booing, villains and yelling things out at the audience, which was very much my show. I was basically doing Panto without knowing I was doing Panto, until I got to the UK. And so my entrance into the UK was back in 2010. I was brought there first to do a show, and I went to Manchester. And Manchester really didn't have a more flamboyant or camp drag scene. And so when I would take these shows on the road, I couldn't fly 10 American performers to another city. I would have to send ahead a script and YouTube videos directing performers with even choreography videos, rehearsal videos that they would learn on the ground, so that when I would fly in, they were already up to speed with blocking, choreography, and this is how we could afford it.
Like a different cast in every city.
A different cast in every city,
Wow.
yeah. And so when we got to Manchester, what we realized was the challenge was finding our people, because they were really only in London. And what you described, the blousey sort of look, I remember my friend Cheddar Gorgeous, who is now a Mancunian queen who's very, very successful. She had never done drag before. And she said, let me take you to so you can see drag. And we went, and there was this like comedian dressed in drag, but barely any makeup, hairy chest, hairy arms, wearing a hideous kind of housewife
Like a Monty Python drag.
Yes. And he said, Cheddar said, that's traditional British drag. This is drag in Manchester. And now,
Stefan, isn't it?
Stefan, Melvin in a dress. Stefan from the lazily named drag queen.
Transvestite.
Melvin in a dress.
Yes.
Oh gosh, but now drag has swept the globe, and
Yes.
Manchester has one of the most creative and interesting drag scenes, not just in the UK, but
try to be such
anywhere.
a tough macho sort of place, Manchester.
Manchester. You should have gone to Liverpool. Liverpool be more. Did you work with Lily Savage?
I have not, but I'm very familiar with Lily Savage and a fan of Lily's, but we have not worked together.
Now, I knew Lily in Liverpool in the 1970s, and she was a friend of Clive Barker's. She was then known as Lily O'Grady, the Shady Lady, and the last I saw of her, my then girlfriend, who became my first wife, and I used to go to gay clubs with Clive and his boyfriend quite often in Liverpool. The Bear's Paw was one, and Sadie's was the main one. And the last I saw of Lily, I can't remember why, but she had been thrown out of Sadie's for some terrible misbehavior. And her friend Nina was still in the club and was hanging out of an upstairs window because we had left with Lily.
I heard this story.
Nina is hanging out of an upstairs window, laughing at and haranguing Lily down in the street. And Lily spun on her heel and in her best Liverpool drag voice declared very loudly, "I won't tell you when I'm in burlesque, you bucket-faced mare."
I love it.
That was the last we saw or heard of Lily until we had moved down to London, and she came up in conversation, and a friend said, "Oh my God, she plays the Vauxhall Tavern every Tuesday." And the Vauxhall Tavern is a big gay pub in South London. She plays there every Tuesday presenting a drag show. She's now Lily Savage. So we went down and reunited with her. And I say my first wife credited Lily with teaching her how to apply makeup.
Oh, wow.
But she then moved on to stage and television and became completely legit and completely accepted. You know, had kind of national treasure status, but although she was vicious and nasty character.
Oh yes,
she didn't hold back, but the more extreme she was, the more she was loved by a mainstream audience in the UK.
Yeah, it's fabulous, fantastic. She's an icon.
Yes. I think Paul has now kind of shelved her, and he's reverted to Paul O'Grady.
That's maybe, well, I understand that. Like I said before, it is very hard and it's physically tough. And but I am thrilled to say that the Vauxhall Tavern is still going strong. And I was lucky that my brother, the last 4 years was living in Vauxhall. You know, he was living just down the street from the tavern. And so when I would go to do these runs, you know, for the Soho Theatre, I was actually able to live with my brother in London, and it was just wonderful. And so I was, you know, they moved the US Embassy over there, and my brother's a diplomat, and so he was living across the street. But of course, I loved the fact that I could just go to the Vauxhall Tavern any night and see any number of different drag acts and queer performances. And you know, I think it might be the oldest queer bar like in the world or something. It has some sort of huge status.
Well, the Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens are very old. They go back hundreds of years, and certainly a lot of the entertainment available in the Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens was not exactly above board. You know, I'd say, I think, and that goes back to the 18th century. So the Vauxhall Tavern may be a hangover from there, but there's London has a lot of those pubs. I think the Black Cat or the Black Cap, I think, in Camden Town, was another big drag pub. But it's good to know that the Vauxhall Tavern is still going on. And now I know that you're hugely missing not having live audiences to play to and play off and play with, because having arrived in not on stage but in a film, you then kind of, I guess, find your feet, so to speak, in the tranny shack in San Francisco, Is that in the mid-90s?
Yes, actually 1996. So when I moved to San Francisco, Tranny Shack had just started, and it grew over the years to become kind of an institution in the drag world, especially in that sort of drag performance world. And so I was just lucky enough to be, one of the original members. My drag was horrible. I didn't know what I was doing. And Heclina, who was the founder of the club and really tirelessly ran it for so long, created this incredible space for so many of us young people to develop our characters, and many of the people that were there stuck with the club for years and years, including, speaking of the UK, my dear friend Animatronic, who is a fab drag queen, assigned female at birth, you would say. So she was a woman doing drag at Tranny Shack, and she left to move to New York, and we went and visited her at Wigstock, and I'll never forget her saying to me, I just joined this band, and it's going so great. We're called the Scissor Sisters. And I said to Heclina, that is the dumbest name for a band. It'll never go anywhere. Why would they call themselves that? What is she thinking? And Animatronic, took all of this sort of drag experience and put it on stage as the Scissor Sisters. And, as you may know, they became in the UK, the band, they became hugely successful.
One of your best friend's favorite bands?
One of my,
I wouldn't say not his favorite.
No,
but
he was very keen on them for a little while.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
also, we were at a show where Jake, is his name?
Jake Spears.
Came and he was looking for you to meet. He was looking to meet you, and something.
But it never happened.
Yes, somewhere in Detroit. I'm remembering, but anyway. Yes.
Now was Tranny Shack at that point an exceptional thing in America, and was it finding acceptance in San Francisco because San Francisco, or were there equivalent places across the country?
I think there were, it's interesting. I always feel like there's these sort of zeitgeist moments creatively, especially with counterculture. If you look at what John Waters was doing in Baltimore at the same time that Andy Warhol and the Factory Girls were making stuff up in New York. In San Francisco, you had the Coquettes and filmmakers, creating these sort of performances that utilized drag and trans actors. And I feel like the same thing was true of the mid-90s, where especially because people started to stop dying finally, because we had this cocktail, this new AIDS cocktail that was working for the first time ever, that you can sort of look at. New York had a place called the Squeeze Box, and Mistress Formica and the Queens at the Squeeze Box were doing something very similar to what we were doing at Tranny Shack. And down in LA, they had something called Drag Strip 66, but this is before the internet. So we didn't really know, everyone was kind of limited to their bubble of underground culture. We didn't really know how similar, what we were doing was to each other. And for sure, we were the queer people who were fed up with this sort of push towards normalcy or heteronormativity. We didn't give a shit about getting married, and we didn't really want to be normal or accepted. And so I think, you have these sort of scenes that pop up that are kind of a reflection of that. And yeah, Tranny Shack definitely was that. Now, I should say, for all the young people, especially who are listening and are mortified by the name of the club, that yes, the word tranny is now universally known as a pejorative, as a bad word. It's something we no longer use. But back in the mid-90s, this was such an underground scene that it was widely understood that this word, which at the time was an umbrella term for anyone that showed any sign of gender variance. So this was drag queens, transvestites, transgender people, non-binary people, these folks, not only were they all included, this is where they actually felt accepted. You know, I'll never forget being, you know, on stage and then coming off stage and meeting like an obvious guy, you know, dressed in women's clothes, introduce me to his wife. You know, this was the place where people found acceptance, whether you were a gay guy doing drag, a trans woman wanting to live her life, a trans woman doing drag, you know, a transvestite who was married to a woman. You couldn't go to a gay bar and be accepted. You know, so I just want to say that for us back then, that word was not, it was not the hate word for us that it is today.
And the club changed its name, in fact.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on all that because I'll be 45 in January, right? Is that right?
Well, January's right. I don't keep count. Yes,
I'll be 45 in January.
My birthday's in January too.
Of course you're a Capricorn, right?
Exactly. Yes, for sure.
Perfect sense. What date?
Set the 7th.
Oh, okay. The 7 is good. You're a 7. Kids are 7. My
Sean at PMI is
I
September
believe
the 7th.
my friend Kelly is also January 7th.
Oh, what is your date?
January 21st.
Mine's the 13th.
13th.
Oh, that's a good number.
I have 7 tattoos and I have 13 tattoos. But so my first introduction to the world of trannies would have been the Morton Downey Jr. show when I was like 8 and my parents put a television with cable in my bedroom, so I never came out of my bedroom, and I'm up until 2-3 o'clock in the morning watching shit I shouldn't be watching. And he had transvestites on, and it was like, what the fuck is this is wonderful and weird and it's great. And but they used that terminology. They used tranny and transvestite, and that's all I ever really knew. And then you had a Rocky Horror coming out, and you hear the word transsexual, but that was an affectionate term. And I have a lot of gay friends and down the whole spectrum of the community. And for older people who are in the community and have friends in the community, maybe we didn't necessarily always keep up with the terminology. So whereas the young people were seeing that as an offensive word, hearing that as an offensive word, and it was not always the way. It covered transgender also, which you didn't hear that word years ago.
No, in fact, that word didn't exist.
Yeah, exactly. Didn't exist. It's a newer thing. So, and I always think it's kind of sad. I thought it was a good word. I liked the word, and I liked the affection that was behind the word. And I understand that times change and terminology changes.
You see, to me, my tranny was my transistor radio.
Yeah, but cut older people a break, because we're not always up on the terminology, and I have kept up pretty well, I think. Yeah. But the word it wasn't always negative. It didn't always carry the negative connotations.
Now, has the whole culture within the scene changed? I mean, I know that drag queen seems to give way to drag artist, perhaps because queen is seen as a pejorative word, and I wonder, whereas it seemed to me initially you use the word transgressive a lot, and you describe yourself as an underground drag act. There was a delight in being offensive. Would
I was getting
it
to
be
this
fair to
too,
say
yes.
that? And if people were going to be offended by it, well, fuck you, be offended.
And all the better.
But we are very much in a culture now where everybody is offended by everything all the time, it seems sometimes. And does that make things more uncomfortable for you and less fun? or
Well, I
do
think
you
that's
just
where
find...
that's where I was getting to. And I think you talked about Clive bringing this up at one point, where being in that community and being, gay and underground, that there was this subversiveness to it, was there was a danger, and there was an interesting aspect to it, and a mysterious aspect to it.
Yes, I mean, you touched on it, Peaches, and I think it relates to horror as well, as far as Clive is concerned. He always used to say that horror took place in the dirty corner over there, where normal people didn't want to go, and I think Clive has always been ambivalent about the idea of mainstream acceptance of homosexuality. Of course, he wants it, and he's a married man now, and he's perfectly at ease with that, and he's perfectly fine with that. But I always think there's a residual part of him that resents that it's mainstream and accepted. That he liked the fact that by virtue of being a homosexual, he was offensive.
Yes, I mean, I think you'll find from a bunch of us older folks, there was a sort of outlaw spirit to it. And, we as out people, especially the more visibly out we were, which I think, being a drag performer is about as visibly out as you can get, were on the front lines often for kind of paving the way for certain rights and kind of forced acceptance by being in your face. Harvey Milk's whole thing was you will never get anywhere if you don't come out of the closet. And so if you look at Stonewall and you look at the queer, sort of rights movement in general, same thing in San Francisco with the Compton cafeteria riots, they often were led by trans people, drag performers, butch women, the people who couldn't hide, the sissies, the people who were what they were and were unapologetically freakish. Look at Quentin Crisp, or anyone that couldn't hide who they were the first to kind of, pave the way. And I think that we resented, especially in the 90s, there was this sort of push by the Human Rights Campaign and other organizations for, sweater gay normalcy. Look at us, we're normal. We're gonna have children just like you, and we want to get married, and they literally would put us, in the corners and kind of push us aside and say, we don't need your help anymore. We don't need you.
And also seen as being a slight embarrassment to the mainstream gay community that wanted...
Not a slight embarrassment. I mean, a full-on, we're done with you. And it's like, wait, we started that fucking parade.
But
you want to hide that.
That's what I mean. I brought up the age thing, like the people in our age range. I mean, I feel sort of angry on behalf of your community sometimes, because I think, wait a minute, youngsters. Yeah. Your elders have done this for you and before you, and
And back then, I mean, I like to say, I was gay when it was still cool, because it's not cool anymore. It doesn't matter. Anyone can be gay, which is fine. And it's actually the same thing with drag. I mean, drag in many ways has become the pumpkin latte of gay culture. It's not, it's not underground anymore. It's basic, and it's popular. And, I'm really good friends with people who are very, very popular, and I don't fault the entertainers, but I'd be lying if I said that I'm not nostalgic for the time when it felt a little more dangerous. I mean, right now, we have a whole thing, and this isn't to put anyone down at all, because I get it, but there's this whole thing where they have drag queens go into libraries and read to children, and this is fine, I get it, but I have no interest in being family friendly. I never have, if you invite me to read to children, I'll probably show up with flayed tits, you know. So it's like,
as you should.
And read from the works of the Marquis de Sade or something.
exactly.
I feel animosity for you, you know, on your behalf, because
it just occurred to me we're completely ignoring the chat. We're so bound up in,
because this is much more interesting.
comments.
I'm sorry, chat.
But are there, if there are questions
yes,
coming
I
up
will.
on the chat, we ought to
I agree.
Acknowledge that
I agree,
people are watching and listening to what we're saying. And to move slightly forward then, but to stay on the same turf, you had talked earlier on with the birth of Peaches Christ as it being a great big middle finger to the Catholic Church, which presumably also your Midnight Mass series was very much intended to be. When does that find its birth, and what was the motivation in that? Like, pretty obvious what the motivation was, I suppose, but.
Well, you know, honestly, Midnight Mass was a seed planted in my head by John Waters himself, who, you know, I idolized growing up, and a kid in Maryland, and discovering that this guy was making movies in Maryland, like in neighborhoods that I recognized. And then I found out when this movie Hairspray was being made, and there were kids in my school who were actually on set and things. And Hairspray was a big, you know, crossover movie for John. Maryland was very proud of it. It was a big moment. But when I found out that the mom of this fat girl in the movie was played by a man, you know, it blew my mind. And I had to pretend I wasn't interested. You know, as a kid in 7th, 8th grade, you know, I was like, whatever. But of course, you know, any image of Divine, anything, and Divine in Hairspray is perfection, you know, and Hairspray and the popularity of Hairspray is what led me to discovering Pink Flamingos at a very young age. And it was John who I brought to Penn State my senior year as a student activist, and really selfishly got to spend the weekend with John as a student who brought him to Penn State. It was John who told me about the Cockettes. It was before the documentary about the Cockettes had come out, and he explained that there was this hippie group of commune living drag performers who used to do shows at the Palace Movie Theater at midnight in North Beach in San Francisco, and they would do these big elaborate drag shows, and then a movie would screen, and everyone would be there till the sun was coming up, and it was, you know, drug fueled and booze fueled. And that kernel of a seed, I just, you know, when you just never shake something. And so in 1998, I went to Landmark Theaters and I said, I want to do a series called Midnight Mass. And to be honest, I just made it up. And what I found out later from former Cockettes was my show was nothing like theirs. It was its own thing. And, you know, and it was, you know, my sort of obsession kind of playing out over and over again, whether I'm making a movie, because I'm also a filmmaker, whether I'm putting on a stage show or doing a movie screening, or whether I'm doing a haunted attraction. All of this is just sort of this manifestation of my love for movies, really, and horror and celebrating movies. And so Midnight Mass was this sort of perfect marriage of drag performance with my love of cult movies.
When does horror first arrive in your life? Because I mean, drag and horror being your twin pillars.
Yes.
Does that make sense? When does horror first impinge for you?
So horror was first, and horror was, according to my parents, they don't even remember. They say that I was always like, you know, a Wednesday Addams who just loved anything dark, anything spooky, Halloween, ghosts. You know, I would watch The Wizard of Oz and obsess over the witch, you know, and the monkeys. And You know, anything.
Dorothy, you were rooting for the Wicked Witch, right?
Absolutely. But I was also, I was also along for the fantasy. Like I was also afraid of her, so I was both afraid of her, but fascinated by her. And, when we went to Disney World the first time and I was really, really young, I was kicking and screaming, not wanting to go into the Haunted Mansion. But it was the only thing I talked about for the 6 months leading up to the trip. So my mother thought they were going to call Child Protective Services because she dragged me in there as I was screaming, begging her to, let me not go in. And of course, I went through the Haunted Mansion. And then as the rest of the family went on to do the rest of the park, I went on the Haunted Mansion the rest of the day, like the entire,
The only good thing at Disney.
Yeah. So it goes back for as long as I can remember. And as far as a movie, the first movie I saw that I think blew my mind was probably Psycho, at a very young age. And, I think seeing Psycho and not recognizing even some of the stuff like that would play out later in life, like Anthony Perkins being gay, of course, Norman Bates having some queerness to that character. And then, of course, the drag finale of it.
Yeah.
Yes, mommy issues for sure. So Psycho was probably the first film that I can say really sparked something. And then, because I'm a child of the 80s, I grew up watching things obsessively on repeat, on cable television, VHS, going to the video stores, and actually it's funny because since you and I spoke earlier, I was thinking about this memory I had of seeing you on the one sheet for Hellraiser and being completely obsessed with it immediately because the image was so striking. And then being at a friend's house and his parents came home and the father had taken his wife to see Hellraiser and they came home. And the woman said it was the worst movie I've ever seen. She said it's the most satanic thing you can ever experience. I can't even believe anyone would make that movie. I'm so upset. I'm so horrified. And I'll tell you, that was it. I was going to see that movie no matter what. Come hell or high water. And, and let me tell you, it delivered, it was like for my young mind. And then my mother saw
when you saw it first?
Oh gosh. Well, what year did it come out?
87.
87. So I was 13. So okay. It was around the time I discovered John Waters. And my mother reminded me today, she said, well, do you remember that you took that picture? I had the Fangoria fold out of you and the Cenobite, the female Cenobite. And she said, and you put it over your bed. You had that thing, everywhere you went, you took that poster for years and years and years. And I got that out of a Fangoria magazine, and so she was very excited that you and I had met because she knows how much it means to me, So I was always, and not just any, I loved horror that sparked imagination. And I think specifically in relationship to Clive Barker and Psycho and some of these things, I realize now as an adult how much queerness there was in these movies.
I was going to say, again, you're seeing Hellraiser the first time completely unaware that it's created by a homosexual.
Yeah. Absolutely. And now I can look back and see that connection. I mean, obviously with John Waters, it was a little more upfront, or the Rocky Horror Picture Show, but this is before I had come to grips with my own, sexuality. So it's like, I look back on, these things and go, wow, these adults were actually speaking to me and reaching me. Like I listened to the Pet Shop Boys, like an American kid, not in England, loved the Pet Shop Boys. And I realize now, there was something deeper going on here, Right. So I think it was in my DNA to love things like, Hellraiser, quite frankly,
Well, there's no directly gay content in Hellraiser, but it is deeply transgressive. Everything about it is transgressive, I think.
I think that having Julia be the villain is something queer men were yearning for, very specifically. And I don't know how to really, I'm sure someone smarter than me could sort of, no, I made a movie where Natasha Lyonne is the killer in the movie.
Right.
And I never realized this before, but I think as queer men, we identify more with the female victims than we do the male bullies in a lot of these, narratives. Even in a high school, drama, we don't identify with the jock or the straight guy. We identify with the girl that gets picked on. And so I think as a horror fan, seeing Julia be so wicked, there was something almost queer about her desire and her unapologetic, way of getting what she wanted. And, her sexuality almost to me comes off like that of a queer man's.
Wow. Interesting.
Interesting, right. I mean, it was absolutely Clive's focus, his intention, what he believed he was doing with Hellraiser was creating the first great hero villainess.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I guess the first Friday the 13th would have come before Hellraiser, I'm pretty certain.
What, late 70s?
Because, of course, in Friday the 13th itself, Jason is not the killer. It's Jason's mom, Betsy Palmer's character, who is the killer. I always thought that Clive was slightly pissed off that we Cenobites kind of crept past Julia, that the audience, particularly the mainstream audience, we kept pointing at the Cenobites and saying, we like them, we'd like more of them if you don't mind, more of them. Not that people didn't like Julia. And Claire's performance is extraordinary. I did the other half of her screen test.
Wow.
I played the victim with the weak bladder at her screen test. And she kept us waiting a little bit, and the word was that she was meditating in her dressing room.
Oh.
She came out, her eyes were rotating in her head, I swear, and I remember being introduced to her as the actor who was going to play opposite her, because I was doing it as a favor to Clive. And I just looked at her and thought, why are we wasting time on a screen test? She's here, right here, right now, and she's ready to go. She then nearly killed me because she didn't quite wait for her cue to swing the hammer.
Oh no!
And when we finished, because all I had to do was turn, give my line that I needed a pee, turn and duck out of frame, because then the frame is all Julia with the hammer and it's all her. So, she was kind of supposed to wait for me to get out of the way before she took a swing with the hammer, and they had a big block of foam attached to the wall so she could hit that.
Oh my gosh.
And it seemed to me there was quite a long pause, and then a slightly timid voice said, "Cut." And I sort of came up, and I'm, waiting to see was that it? Are we doing it again? And everyone's kind of going. So like the audience and the producers. And Selwyn Roberts, who was the first AD, he said to me, "She missed you by that much." That much. So she nearly relegated me to a curious footnote in the history of horror films as the guy who was going to play Pinhead until his brains beaten out by Higgins. But it's an astonishing performance. But I've never heard it put in context.
I was just going to say, I've never heard anyone articulate it quite as well as that. And I would love to hear you have a conversation with Clive.
Yeah.
As somebody who gets it.
Well, I have to say, I definitely was fascinated by the Cenobites, who I also would say, for me, looking back on it, I didn't identify them as queer then, but now I can see, with the leather and the S&M, knowledge that I have of the queer community. I mean, I go to Folsom Street Fair. It's like 2,000 Cenobites walking around, you know? So it's like, you know, I didn't know it at the time, you know, obviously.
In a skirt.
Exactly. Pinhead is in a skirt, which that actually, you know, that really is incredibly meaningful for a kid like me. But I would love to let Clive know that it did not go unnoticed on this horror-loving fan's young brain that Julia, and in many ways, I think it's what led me to kind of create the movie that I did, where Natasha Lyonne plays the monster in the movie. She's the one killing people. That's directly related to me being so fascinated by Julia, and Claire's performance is incredible, and her sexuality, her bloodlust, her just getting her autonomy, you know, these were the things that, you know, queer men were, I think, struggling with. And to see that character is a real hero for us, even though she's, you know, a monster. And then I feel like in the second film,
I mean, I've never really thought about this, but there is no moment in the film where she has a moment of pause, or even a hint of a thought that, wait a minute, I'm a respectable woman and wife, and I ought not to be doing these things. I ought not to be beating businessmen's brains out and feeding their blood to my skinned lover who's living under the floorboards in the attic. There's never any moment of hesitation or pause for her to see herself in that context of womanhood. She's just
she is incredible. And I think, and then of course, in Hellbound, it's sort of, you know, taken to the next level. And her performance in both movies, I mean, it is just, I think all the performances in the first, you know, two movies are brilliant. They're just brilliant. And as a young kid who'd never seen anything like those films, it blew me away. And like I said, it wasn't until many years later that I was able to kind of do a deeper analysis and say, oh, that's what I was looking for. And I think you're right about Friday the 13th. However, I would argue that it's sort of a gimmick at the end, because you as the audience assume it's a male throughout the whole, you know, film. Whereas in Hellraiser, there's no denying who it is and what she's doing, and you get to kind of relish in the deliciousness of her evil, you know, whereas in Friday the 13th, you just get it in the third act.
And I think Friday the 13th, it's more of a mommy, it's a protective mommy character, really, and you don't see it, it's not driven by, you know, lust and sex.
Clive spins that in a way, because the questionable family relationship, I mean, it's kind of an inversion of Psycho in a way that we mentioned before. The questionable family relationship in Hellraiser is Kirsty and her father.
Yes.
Kirsty is just a little bit too devoted to Daddy.
Yes.
Seems that boyfriend takes a back seat to Daddy in her mind, and this is not quite the way around it ought to be, really. And Clive certainly was very, very influenced in creating Kirsty as a victim who will be heroine. The victim who, because you talked about gay men's identifications with female victims.
Yes.
Kirsty will ride through that and become the hero, the heroine of the movie. But Clive was very influenced by Suspiria. Dario Argento's Suspiria, the original Suspiria. In relation to that, the young, vulnerable female who will overcome her doubts and fears to conquer and defeat the evil.
I have a question for you, Peaches, from somebody in the chat, wanting to know if you can give them info on where they can watch All About Evil.
That is the big question. So All About Evil, which is the feature film I made, basically was self-distributed by the producers in North America. So it is available in Japan and Germany and other places. But right now, after many years of trying, it's finally being prepped for a re-release.
Oh, good.
And I actually was in a post-production house last week looking at a master. They're up-resing it is what they call, which I think just means making it better. I don't know, making the resolution better. But it's going to be streaming on a major horror streaming network later this year, and it will be on Amazon Prime and iTunes. And then also there's a distributor who is going to do a Blu-ray of it as well. So coming soon.
Oh,
Well,
fantastic.
There's your
Right.
answer. David, do we want to throw a picture of Doug's book up real quick? People were asking to see pictures of it as it's our giveaway for tonight. So this is for the most gifted subs.
We're not giving peaches away. I couldn't raise enough money.
I'm much cheaper than you'd think.
This is Doug's book, which he will personalize and sign.
Couldn't afford the wig, let alone you.
It's so good. It is so
It's
B-52s too.
But it's kind. I see it as a kind of homage to a former president as well. Yes, there's me book. So
Yeah.
if you're interested in that, it covers. It's not really. It isn't an autobiography. I talk about masking, the cultural history of masking, into Greek theatre, and then into cinema, and in particular, my angle is the actor's relationship to the makeup and makeup artists, and how that is different from people like Lon Chaney Sr., for whom it was a calling as much as anything else. He designed and made and applied all his own makeups, and then got up and gave the performances as well, through to people who had at best an ambivalent relationship to the whole thing. Thinking specifically of Charles Lawton and his relationship to his makeup and his makeup artist in The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which was not good, and into the present day. And I did my own interviews with the late Gunnar Hansen, with Robert Englund, with Kane Hodder, and then obviously talking at great length about my experience with it all, my process of coming to Pinhead, with some autobiographical stuff put in. And it's not a new book by any means. I'm kind of proud of the fact that I've kept this fucking thing in print now for over 25 years.
See that? I didn't even know Doug had a book, they said.
There you go.
So
now you do.
ta-da. So there's that. What other movies do you consider important in creating your character?
Well, I mean, I definitely feel like it's a mashup of a lot of things. My love for Elvira, of course, is one of the ingredients, and I loved just how funny she was, and how, well, she still is, but also how she was also horror, and she loved horror, and that she brought a lot of fun to horror. Certainly, I had the pleasure for my podcast recently for an episode that hasn't been released yet, but I got to do an interview with Terry Castle, who is William Castle's daughter.
Okay.
And, so much of that interview made me realize, like how much of my career, whether it's Midnight Mass or Terror Vault or really anything, is really so much is the spirit of William Castle. And he also injected fun, into horror. I think that I love really scary movies with a lot of, fantastic ideas, like A Nightmare on Elm Street. The first A Nightmare on Elm Street, I think, is such a creative such a brilliant special film. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, that first Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Poltergeist. Speaking of Tobe Hooper, I think Poltergeist, is an incredible movie. So all of those classic horror films, but mixed in with things like, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, a healthy dose of Pam Grier. I love strong, kick-ass women. So, Russ Meyer, Faster Pussycat, Kill Kill. One of the great gifts of Midnight Mass was getting to bring Tura Satana to Midnight Mass and befriend her after she really hadn't met her fans, for so long, and to give her, standing ovations. And then she and I got to go on a tour together, but she didn't like to fly, so we'd have to drive everywhere. But yeah, like those sorts of films where, The Bad Seed, I guess I like wicked women.
Yes.
I'm realizing now, like, oh my God, all the movies I like are about wicked women, Yeah. And again, like, Hellraiser, especially of the canon at the time it came out, you look at all the popular horror that was coming out, there weren't movies that featured wicked women, the way that Hellraiser did. So,
Does Disney feature there, as it certainly did for me as a boy?
Yes.
The impact of both Cruella de Vil and Maleficent.
Yes. Absolutely.
On me as a boy were immense. I mean, I think Maleficent is. I'm still slightly bewildered.
You have the hots for Maleficent.
Oh, beyond the hots. I mean, it was and I mean, I was sexually obsessed with a cartoon.
It would not be alone in that, I don't think.
No.
Yeah.
Brilliant creations and Cruella.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're exactly right. That Disney, especially, and again, talk about queerness, and especially where queerness was mashed up with villainy. When you think about these queer horror tropes, and I know we actually haven't really talked that much about it, but we touched upon it with Norman Bates, where I was so hungry for any sort of queerness that it didn't matter to me that Norman Bates was killing people. I was sort of, I was both identifying, I was horrified by him, but I was also identifying with him. And Disney films did that as well, where they used queerness as a device for fear. And so often some of these really sissy or femme male characters like Scar in The Lion King, they were using this sort of what we would consider queer code, but only ever in the villains. And I, feel like that mixed with the witches, Maleficent, the witch in Snow White. Well, of course, Ursula, we know Ursula, the sea witch was designed to look like Divine. They actually used Divine as the model.
I didn't
So
know that.
yeah, so we young queer people, we're fucked up for a reason, Or old queer people, I should say.
It's always all Disney's fault.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's why I feel the animosity on behalf of you and the gay community, is because, I mean, you're made up of such wonderful things, and you came by it honestly, and and I think that so much of that is gone now,
Well, I mean, it is an interesting thing to meet young people who don't have to sneak around, and they in some ways, I'm really happy for them because they can turn on their Netflix and see themselves represented in horror movies in a healthy way. Like I was watching the I forget what they're called, but I think it's Fear Street, something or another on Netflix, and the horror, the protagonist is a young woman of color, as the Scream Queen, who's a lesbian. Like, that's amazing, and they present it in this very nonchalant way. Like it's never really an issue. It's just what she is. So I'm happy that they have that, But then there's this other part of me that's like, you don't know. I walked through, 7 inches of snow to get to school.
Day. Yeah.
It was, I only,
Street?
yeah, it's called, yeah.
Have you watched it?
No, I've missed that. It's called Fear Street, David?
Oh,
Fear
that's
Street,
the one with the dates.
1994, yeah.
Okay.
I was just literally not expecting, and a few moments I was like, "Oh shit!" Yeah, it was really. I thought it was well done. I mean, I enjoyed it.
Okay.
You know what I liked about it that was refreshing was that when the kills happen, you actually care.
Yeah.
And I feel like horror writers have forgotten that, like, it's best if we care about the people getting killed.
You say that all the time about people, see people dying in movies or something. It's like, I don't really fucking care about that person.
I start watching things all the time and give up, and often part of the reason is I suddenly think I don't care about any of you. I don't.
Exactly.
If you die in the next 5 minutes, I don't care. I'm not invested in any of you as characters, and if you don't feel that, I mean, again, to go back to Julia, it's a perfect case in point. This is an unredeemably bad woman, but you're invested in her at every step of the way. The brilliance of the way Clive presents it, and Claire's performance, but it's absent an awful lot of the time for me. It's make people care about your characters.
A very frivolous question.
Oh, good.
It's a good one. The names. The best things about drag performers are the names. So, what are some of your favorite names?
Well, oh, thank you. There's so many. Now I actually, this is funny. This is so obnoxious to admit, but there were local newspapers that would sometimes ask me to, present a column or to do something. And I would write under a pseudonym so that I could write about myself and write about my own events. And I did that for a few years under a name called Angie Dickinsert. But I don't know that you would, I don't know that young people today would even get it.
You made me snort.
That is absolutely incredible. Holy shit.
Yeah. And of course, the names I love are offensive, and I love Torny Anus, Sahorny Beaver, all that stuff,
I knew it would be a good question.
This is keep these names going, please.
I just want to
Don't stop.
I just want to hear drag names forever.
Yeah, I mean, when you're a drag queen, one of the things that we do is just text each other dumb ideas for drag name. So you need to get on a drag queen text thread. I said the other day that so I rewatched The Little Shop of Horrors again for my podcast, which I have to say, if you haven't seen that movie in a while, like I hadn't, oh my God, it holds up. It is a
listen
great
to the soundtrack all the time.
Oh, it's so good. And so I was watching Rick Moranis, and I went down a Rick Moranis kind of rabbit hole of like realizing that, like, after being so successful at the height of his career, he just disappeared. He just kind of gave up acting, and so I was thinking about him, and I was thinking, okay, a great drag king name would be Lick Moranis.
Good one.
So I mean,
that is a really good one.
I could go all night.
I could probably listen. I always liked Harvey Firestein's name in Torch Song Trilogy, which is Virginia Ham.
Yes.
Yes.
And
Well, I love RuPaul's name in Tu Wong Fu. So RuPaul plays a drag queen character, really briefly seen in quite what would be considered a pretty shocking image today, because she comes out wearing a sequin gown of the Confederate flag. And so, it's RuPaul, this giant black drag queen wearing a sequin Confederate. And see, this is the kind of thing I love about drag, right? Like that's a complicated image. And they introduce her character's name and they say, let's hear it for Rachel Tension. And I think when drag is at its best, it's, provocative and nasty and, pushing buttons.
Why bother if not?
Yeah.
Someone in chat said my favorite is Lucy Stoll.
Yes. Lucy Stoll. That's a real queen from Chicago. She's fabulous. I love her.
Yeah, Karen from Finance. That name had me tears the first time I heard that.
Yeah.
My friend is texting me what my drag name would be. Barb Dwyer.
Barb Dwyer.
Yeah, so it's like barbed wire. Yeah. Yeah. I literally texted back and I was like, how do I pronounce the last part? And he was like, barbed wire ...
Is there a way to find your drag name? Like I know how to find your porn name, which is your first pet is your first name, and the name of the street you were living on at the time is your last name. So my porn name is Kim Towers.
Oh, that's a good
incredible.
Name. Wow.
Yeah. And your science fiction name, your Star Wars name, is just your name pronounced backwards. So my Star Wars name is Yeldar Salgawad.
It actually flows pretty well. Like, did you have to write that down a few times to remember that, or?
No, it's like I can sing "How Much Is That Doggy in the Window" backwards. It's easy to do.
Oh my God!
Think it a word at a time as you go along. Window in doggy, that is much how.
I liked Savini's porn name, which was Squeaky Taylor.
Squeaky Taylor, yes, that's Tom Savini's porn name.
So wait, what is it? First pet and street name?
Yeah, first pet and street name is your street name is your porn name.
Oh boy! And the name of the street you were living on at the time.
Does a hamster count as a pet?
Oh,
of course.
Yes.
Well, mine would be Stuart Carmun.
That's kind of boring.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Mine is Nico DeSoto.
Oh, that's proud.
Good ring to it.
Now would be Lucy Oakbrook.
It's slightly more.
I don't think you have much of a career ahead of you with that, David.
Yeah, I'm gonna stay behind the camera, I guess.
Is there a way to find your drag name, or is it's just purely invention?
Well, I've seen those memes, find your drag name that way, but none of them work as well as the porn names, I don't think. There's no system, because I think a great drag name actually has to have a little bit more of a connective tissue to who you are or what you want to express. And so it's more than just what might look catchy on the marquee. It's got to kind of come from, like, you got to think about it.
I think they come about pretty organically, I would think.
Yeah.
Something.
I can tell you, Doug, that you'll appreciate this, because I have a performer in England who's in all of my shows, and I adore her. And when I met her, I remember thinking, I love you. I think you're so talented, but I kept it to myself. I said to myself, I hate her drag name. And her drag name is Donna Trump. And, so I'm like driven crazy by her drag name, to the point where I don't even want, and she had that drag name before he won the election. And so then when I'm going over there and doing shows, after he's won the election, I'm thinking, I can't take it anymore. So I said to her, would you ever consider changing your drag name? Because, like, I don't get, like, I'm sorry, but it's sort of like the word tranny. Like, I don't care what what comedy, or how frivolous you might have thought he was, when he was just the host of The Apprentice or whatever. But this is dangerous and awful. And, you wouldn't go by Adolf Hitler, if that was your dragon. And she stops me and says, she says to me, darling, my name has nothing to do with Donald Trump. And I'm like, what? I didn't know that in England, Trump is another word for fart.
Oh, for fart, yes. Oh, absolutely. Yes.
I was waiting for that.
So if you've done a Trump, it means you farted.
Yeah. Donna Trump.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's her name.
Yeah.
That's
I said,
subtle, I have to say. I mean, I heard it and didn't. I mean, I heard you say.
Well, that's because I pronounce it wrong. I'm saying Donna Trump.
Yes.
Over there, they call her Donna Trump. And I had no idea. So I started asking the audience at the end of the show. I'd be like, do you all get what her name means? Do you know that she's not named after the monster in the White House? And the British audiences would be like, yeah, you idiot.
Well, I assumed that because Trump really wasn't really a thing over there until like The Apprentice for you guys when we grew up with him in the public eye here. But I know what Trump means in the UK.
Around the boxing matches, and but he wasn't doing it. He liked to pretend he was a boxing, like he's always pretended. He's the biggest con man ever. He just,
I still think he
just
should
hung
change
around with Don King and gave him a casino to put his fights on in. He wasn't promoting anything. We were aware of him from that and being in Home Alone and so forth, but not to the extent that he was here.
So I was sort of waiting for something that had to do with farting with the name, since it was the UK.
You were ahead of me, I have to say.
Yeah, it's true. I had no clue, but I still said to her, you got to change that name because it's just, ugh.
Yeah, well, now it's you can't separate it. Did she?
No, she's still, you can find her on social media. She'll probably hear me talk shit about her through this.
You'll be hearing from her.
Yeah.
Why?
I did find a drag name generator, but I don't know the accuracy of this.
I would think that would be such a difficult step, a huge step in the career of a drag queen, to come up with your name and really settle on that. Because what if you hear something else that you go, oh shit,
Yeah,
also because, as you say, there's a personal element to it, and there's usually an attempt to find a scatological or offensive pun in there.
Or sometimes it's like just a unique thing. Like my friend Heclina, one of my best friends in drag, like I thought that for the longest time her name was because she kind of is obnoxious and would heckle people. And so Heclina, I thought was related to heckling. I never really questioned it. It's just her weird drag name. Everyone calls her Heclina. Well, she's Icelandic, and there's a volcano in Iceland called Hekla. And that's where her drag name comes from. It has nothing to do with, so if you're in Iceland, you get it that she's like this volcano. But if you're not in Iceland, she's just Heclina. But I still love that it's so unique to her,
Now, so presumably you adopted Christ again as the big fuck you to the Catholic Church. Does Peaches come just because it sounds a bit like Jesus, or?
Yes, and I will say this, that while I was pissed at the Catholic Church, I'm not actually pissed at Jesus, and I like to make the difference. And what I mean when I say this, and I got in a lot, actually, once again, the UK, the most trouble I've ever gotten into having this exact conversation was on BBC Radio, because the interviewer was really grilling me about my name and it being offensive, and I was jet lagged, and and I said, look, I'm an entertainer. I grew up with this name being used to put fear into me, to make me feel ashamed of myself, to control me, to manipulate me. I have taken this name. I actually like Jesus as he's presented in the stories that we're told. I have no problem with Jesus. I actually like the name Christ and what Christ stands for. And all I'm doing is kind of trying to take the power out of it that has been so, misused and so hurtful. And the worst you can say about me is that I make people laugh, as far as this name goes. And then I went on to say, I've never molested any children. I've never, so I mean, maybe I pushed it, but was clueless to the fact that my next gig.
You don't remember who the interviewer was, do you?
I could easily look it up because it's online. Because what happened was
I'll pull it up right now.
The next place I was going, so I was there doing a tour with the BFI, and it was a celebration of science fiction. And they brought me over to do, because they wanted to include camp as part of this celebration of science fiction. And so they brought me over and I went on a tour with my Barbarella show, which is a Barbarella parody, where I have a big bear drag queen playing the lead. And so I did that interview, and then we went to Belfast, where we were met at the airport by some authorities who said that the show may not happen because of my interview. They had received enough complaints, and I believe that the way that Belfast is set up, like you really can't say whatever you want, And so I was in trouble, and the show did happen, but they actually had a person in the audience from the government, who was noting everything in a show full of just poppers and dildo jokes, and the audience, the only audience to ever give us a standing ovation for that show was in Belfast. And I sometimes think like it was very moving to be at a place where being stupid was so desired. The audience really got that you had to fight for your right to be silly and stupid, which is really what that show was all about. And Peaches Christ is a silly thing. I'm an entertainer. I want to take the power out of this stuff. The person who submitted the report, we weren't allowed to see it until recently. So there's a freedom of information thing. And so the report has come out and it's years later. That was probably 5 or 6 years ago. And of course it has reference to dildo, reference to, it's hilarious.
That would be the BBC. Wonderful. I mean, the BBC, I mean, much less so now. She's she's known as Auntie in the UK, because she behaves like your disapproving auntie all the time. She's hitched her skirts up somewhat, but and yet there are all kinds of things that used to fly by the BBC. There was a wonderful radio show that I used to listen to Sunday lunchtimes when I'd be after dinner. I'd be washing the dishes or drying the dishes before going to Sunday school. The Methodist Church for me, not the Catholic Church. There were 2 versions of it, Round the Horn and Beyond Our Ken, because it was presented by Kenneth Horne. And they had embedded in the program, Kenneth Williams was a regular on the show. I don't know whether you would know the name necessarily. Very flamboyant, homosexual comedian and comedy actor, very, very funny, an awful fucked up private life, but funny guy. And he was a regular with Hugh Paddock, and they used to do these story sketches, and they always turned up in them, and there were two flamboyantly gay characters talking in Polari, which was the gay slang, and they were called Jules and Sandy, And they just and oh, hello, Mr. Orne. Hello, my name's Sandy. This is my friend Jules. Hello, Mr. Orne. How you doing? Bona Tavada, your dolly old eek. Which is lovely to see your dear old face in Polari. And the innuendos that they got into their performance were, when I look back on it now and listen back to it now, extraordinary. But the BBC had no idea what they would. This was going out to, middle class England, Sunday lunchtime on a Sunday.
Now, what year? Around what time?
This is the 1960s.
Okay.
Yeah.
So before Mrs. Slocum and her pussy.
Before Mrs. Slocum and her pussy. Yes. But I always loved that Lola by the Kinks, which is a song about a heterosexual man falling in love with a woman and realizing that this woman is quite manly for a woman, but falling in love nevertheless, was banned by the BBC, but not because of that. It was banned by the BBC because the lyrics were down in old Soho where they drink Coca-Cola, and you can't advertise on the BBC. So the Kinks had to change the lyric. So I met her down in old Soho where they
drank champagne, tasted just like cherry cola.
Tasted just like cherry cola, and then the BBC were perfectly happy with it, and happy to play the record on the radio. They were only worried about it being Coca-Cola, not about it being a love song to a transsexual.
Yeah.
See all we've learned this evening? People are saying, I didn't know that. I've learned so much.
I've learned more than I've learned in the last probably like 2 weeks combined.
That's it? Just 2 weeks? Well, we are over 2 hours. And although I could probably sit here and talk to you for a few hours more.
I do want to know about, because it goes back to middle fingers to the Catholic Church. The Easter weekend bus trips.
Mm-hmm. So for years and years and years, my friend Heckelina and I had a trip to Reno where we would take 2 bus loads of drag queens. And this often meant people who only did drag, maybe at Halloween, all the way up to, seasoned professionals. So it was really
back in the mid 90s, late 90s again?
Well, we did it for like 20 years though. So it started then. And this was a tradition which still goes on. It will probably come back. They canceled it because of the pandemic. Now, truth be told, I gave up doing it because I was the den mother for years. I gave up doing it after about 15 years because I couldn't take it anymore. It was, taking 2 busloads of drag, and not just drag queens, like this is a party trip on Easter weekend, leaving San Francisco at the crack of dawn on Saturday morning, in full drag, like crazy drag, and then driving these freaks to Reno, Nevada, on a 4-hour party bus with a traditional stop in Auburn at the McDonald's, where everyone does a photo shoot and dances on the counters. And, and just like, I was constantly having to deal with the police and, it was an amazing, incredible experience. And I feel like the reason I retired when I did was because I had seen it come full circle. And that's not a problem. But when we first started going to Reno in the early 2000s, the late 90s, it was like, for those Reno people at the casinos and on the streets, it was as if, the horror show of all horror shows had come to town, and they were totally like, they didn't even know how to be homophobic because they were so mortified by what they were seeing. They couldn't wrap their heads around it.
And now I'm sure it's not that big of a deal when people see that now.
Well, that's the thing. So he'd gone full circle. So the last time I did it, I remember seeing this queen who was full on hairy queen wearing like a Cher style bikini, like a bodysuit with a giant Cher mohawk, you know, and studded bracelets. I mean, and heels, but like full on hairy ass Italian body, like walking through the casino with hairy ass cheeks out. And I'll never forget seeing this family, like a big family with little children, ask this queen to stop for a photo. Right. And they put their kids, and the kids are all wearing their Easter best. And I thought, okay, my job here is over. Done.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't need to do this anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. And this was never put on film?
It was actually, and there is film of it. There is a documentary about these trips and about Tranny Shack and this era. It's called Filthy Gorgeous, taken after this song. And it's a wonderful film, but here's the thing. The filmmakers did a great job of documenting the scene. They never considered what it would be like to get the rights to all the music that was being played or performed to. And so this film lives underground because no distributor is ever going to, you know, be able to secure the rights, even if they tried. You know, we're talking, you know, people lip syncing to Michael Jackson songs, people lip syncing to Disney songs while pulling flags out of their asses. You know, there will never be a time when this music can be licensed. Yeah. So it is on film, but it, you know, it's hard to
look. Right. Yeah. I will be looking.
Wow.
Disney can do it all.
Yeah.
They can.
I've always been surprised that Disney has left me alone because for years I've done a Hocus Pocus parody. But when I began doing that parody, you know, they had no interest in that film. They had no interest in that property. They, you know, had really kind of shelved it. And then as my show got more and more successful and we did more and more touring, guess who pulls out the witches and adds them to their, you know, Halloween parade at the theme parks and then announces they're going to do a sequel. And I mean, not to toot our own horn, but drag queens and queer people are oftentimes the ones leading the way as far as these things go. And I have to say, I'm really, you know, we've talked a lot about horror and the changes. And I think maybe I've come off as a little negative, but I want to say that I actually am thrilled with where we're at right now, in particular, because of trailblazers like Clive Barker. And, you know, I just went and saw the new Candyman movie. And, you know, I just thought it was so beautiful. And the fact that a 28-year-old Black woman has the #1, you know, box office hit, and not just it's not just the #1 horror movie. It was the #1 movie at the box office. Like, we're living in an exciting new era. So, you know, as much as I might come off as a bitter old queen, I actually feel like, you know, all of this fighting has been worth it because we live to see a day where these folks can tell stories. You know, a young Peaches Christ might actually be able to, you know, make a Hollywood movie.
I could attach many adjectives to you, but bitter would never be one of them.
Oh, thank you.
Why don't you tell everybody where and when your haunted attraction is and when they can go visit?
So the haunted attraction opens September 24th, and it runs through Halloween. And the show is called The Immortal Reckoning, and it's a haunted supernatural adventure. And then in addition to the show itself, we've also built and staged a giant pop-up bar in the vaults here, the actual old bank vaults of the building. It's called Fang Bang, and it's a vampire bar. And really, it's just an excuse for me to play all my favorite 80s goth music every night. And we have vampire actors and we have vampire experiences. You might get locked in a coffin or, you know, any of those things as part of the Fang Bang show. So this is being all opened up on September 24th, and terrorvault.com is where you can go. And then I'm on all the social media things. If you want to follow Peaches Christ, that would be lovely.
And is that open through to Halloween, or do you run beyond?
So we are right now we are scheduled and have tickets on sale through Halloween, but the actors all have a possible extension. So if the show is successful enough and we can milk another weekend out of it, we will, but there's no guarantee. So, you know, grab a ticket while you can.
While you can.
I'm organizing a cross-country bus trip, gathering people on the way as we go. Busloads of horror fans are going to arrive in San Francisco for the show.
In drag.
Okay. I'll do bald drag.
Okay.
And then your podcast, which is like the latest manifestation of the Midnight Mass, really, right? Where do people find that?
Well, really anywhere.
Podcasts, I guess.
Yes, anywhere you listen to your podcasts, you should be able to find the Midnight Mass podcast. It's hosted on Buzzsprout, so you can for sure find it there, but it's also on Spotify and iTunes and all of that. And really, like everyone else in the world, the pandemic, you know, was an opportunity for me to sort of finally get to some of these projects that I hadn't gotten to before because I was busy doing theater and other things that were, you know, taken away. And so the podcast for me is the audio version of the stage show. It's basically me and my really good friend, Michael Verratti, just celebrating our favorite cult movies, both with people who are in the films, which is lovely, but we tend to put a special focus on the fact that they're cult and what makes them cult in terms of how they've affected people's lives. So we really are interested in, you know, why did these movies, you know, affect you to the degree that they have, and you know, how's that played out in your life?
Cool. And you will be making an appearance at some point. Yes.
Well, I have only to be asked, and I will be there.
Well, we would love it. So I think I told you that I met Simon Bamford years ago at a festival.
In Hellraiser, for people not familiar with Simon. Yeah.
He is Butterball and looks nothing like Butterball.
No,
You know, so I remember,
so
I remember
lovely.
remember meeting him in Vienna. And I just remember being like, I can't believe this is Butterball. I can't believe I'm sitting next to Butterball. Butterball and I are going out for coffee, but like, there's just nothing Butterball about Simon. So, you know, he's quite wonderful and lovely, and we've stayed in touch. So I had proposed to my co-host, Michael, that maybe we could do a Hellraiser episode. And then I thought on a lark, I would message you, and then this is how I ended up here. And so I would love if you're a guest on our podcast. That would be lovely.
I would be honored.
It's so ironic. I said you had crossed my mind many times. I'm just, you know, we had this thing dropped in our lap, and here we are doing it, but we seem to have trouble working up the courage to approach people. So
I understand.
I told us, you know. So when you messaged, I was so happy to hear from you. And
I think you would be surprised. I think you both should just be fearless and ask people. I mean, it is a thrill. You know, like, you know, this is an honor to be able to talk to you guys.
Well, we've taken up a lot of your time, and. I know you already had a busy night entertaining the press of San Francisco.
And the wig is the wig heavy? Is it very heavy? I know Elvira always talks about how heavy hers is.
So it's an illusion as well. I'll say that you do discover which wig designers make comfortable helmets, and this one is actually pretty okay. The thing that is strange about it, and maybe Doug relates to this, after you've been wearing something foreign on your body for you know, many hours, you get this phantom sensation. So tonight and tomorrow, because I've been in a wig all day, and even with the breasts and stuff, tomorrow I'll forget that I don't have the wig. You still feel like you have the wig on.
I used to, because of, well, I mean, basically everything was glued to me.
Yeah.
So I had foam latex glued everywhere except for where I had the bald cap on. And I what I got was falling asleep at night after a day in the makeup, and I guess it would simply be because my skin didn't breathe, because the pores were blocked. This kind of rippling sensation running down my forehead, which was very strange. I grew to kind of like it. I got used to it. You know, it was like a friend. But I think it was just that process of the skin sort of breathing.
I think so. I call it the tingler.
The tingler, right? Yes, that. And I spent the next few days pulling bits of glue and latex out from behind my ears.
Oh yes.
Tried not to do it in public.
Yeah.
Well, thanks to everyone in chat. Thanks to everyone who hung out and watched and listened. And I could honestly talk forever, but you know.
Yeah, that was incredible. Now, one thing about this giveaway here, we are tied. Between X Doolittle, which came from a very unique place. I'll tell you guys about that. And then Haha Stretchy. They're both
Stretchy.
Yeah, they're both tied at 5.
Okay, well, something's got to give, right?
Hey, Sleeping Fears. All these people showing up a little late. I love it.
Yeah.
They get both their details, David. I'll send each of them a book.
Aw, aren't you nice?
Oh, that's incredible. Sleep and Fear is actually one of our newer vendors on our site, so welcome joining this.
Yes. Hello, everybody on the chat. I hope.
But you know, hey, there's always the option of rewatching, right?
Yep. Subscribers can rewatch. Yes.
I think I'm gonna rewatch.
Available in perpetuity.
Yes.
Peaches, thank you so much. It has been an
You're
absolute
wonderful
delight. Quite wonderful.
Yes.
And thank you once again. We should let you go and get de-sequined.
Yes.
Yes, well, absolutely. And thank you. It's been like such a thrill. And I look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Yes,
absolutely. I hope so. Take care. Thank you again.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay.
Oh.
I guess that's good night, everyone, right?
Yes, that is it.
All right.
Good night, Twitch.
Good night,
all right,
everybody.
Bye-bye. Peace and pain.